This is the Content and AI Podcast, episode number 31. The introduction of AI tools like Microsoft's Copilot creates new opportunities for content designers. But as with any innovation, the new technology can be a two-edged sword. For every customer workflow that's streamlined, there may also be an opportunity for bias or hazard to get into the product. As a content designer and champion for responsible AI, Leah Krauss helps her colleagues at Microsoft understand and apply responsible AI principles in their product design work.
Welcome to the Content and AI Podcast, where experts on artificial intelligence share their wisdom with the content community. Our mission is to demystify and democratize AI, to make its principles and practices accessible to all content practitioners. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 31 of the Content and AI Podcast. I'm really delighted today to welcome to the show Leah Krauss. Leah is a senior UX content designer at Microsoft, where she works on Copilot, which many of you may have heard of. So welcome, Leah. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you're up to these days.
Hi, Larry. It's so nice to be here. As you mentioned, I'm working on Copilot for Sales, which is a flavor of Microsoft Copilot, and that's been really exciting to be in on kind of the ground floor of AI at Microsoft. And responsible AI, which is what we're going to talk about today, is one of my most favorite topics to talk about. I've done some conference talks about it, and my coworkers are really tired of hearing me go on about it. I actually serve, no, that's not true. It's only half true. I serve as actually a responsible AI champion, one of the responsible AI champions on my team. So it's sort of my thing. And I think it's so exciting, the moment we're at here, and how big a part content designers can play in it.
Yeah, I think when you're working with language models, you'd think the content people would have a leg up on some, but that's really the first thing I want to follow up on is that Copilot. I think it's sort of like multiple products. Then it's a suite. Is it? Well, I guess Microsoft knows about suites with the Office suite. So there's integrations of Copilot with each of the Office elements, Word and Excel and all that. And then there's also specific tools like Copilot for Sales. How big is that little budding empire at Microsoft?
Well, so there's one Copilot, and then the different flavors depending on the user's needs. So as you said, like if people are using Office, they'll see Copilot in Word and they'll see it in PowerPoint, and Outlook, of course. And if they have more specific needs, like a salesperson, then they can use our more specific flavor, which has, the kind of email summary that a seller might need. Did my customer mention the budget, or things like that? And it can also pull from other sources so that the seller can have everything they need right in that one place. Copilot is a big thing at Microsoft, as you know, and I think it's only going to get bigger in the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's as you're talking about the two, I'm reminded of like how this thing is coming together. It's like there's this one, I assume it's based on one of the GPTs from OpenAI, given the Microsoft relationship there. But it sounds like then that most of the applications, each of these flavors of Copilot, is a lot of your work around fine-tuning the model then for that specific task?
Absolutely. I work really closely with our data science team. And the first thing you sort of have to, there's like the GPT prompt, but then we also write our own prompts on top of that. So we tell the GPT that, this is a selling audience, for instance, and I'm really involved with working with the data science team to define what a good output looks like. Because while they're the experts in the model and how to create, an output, I'm the expert in what makes it good and what makes it human and what makes it useful to a seller and scannable and valuable and things like that. So the great thing about this project has been that we get started early on working together. As we content designers know, sometimes content people are brought in too late. And that is definitely a danger here too. Like, for people who are listening, if you can always do something with the data science team, but if you're there from the beginning and you're talking about the prompt together, then you can move forward and really have an impact.
That's really interesting because there's all these new collaborations that are emerging along with these AI tools. So you're working, is it mostly data scientists? I've talked to other folks who've worked like with the machine learning engineers and other new collaborators. What does the team you're working with look like these days?
So at Microsoft, it's called data science. At other places, it may be called machine learning, but it's like the same group of people.
Yeah.
There's the people who care about the algorithms, basically, we can call them. And then we have the people who care about the words, and which, by the way, is not only content designers, it's also product managers and interaction designers. But content is really leading the way.
Yeah, I love that's fantastic to hear. And what you just said too is it sounds like there's more opportunities, or is there more opportunity, or have you just made it happen to get in earlier, or do data scientists see the need to involve word people earlier on?
Well, we've been working on AI features and machine learning features even before there was Copilot. And even before I joined the team, actually. So my manager, who has been on the team, longer than I have, was working with the data scientists when we had a feature called conversation intelligence. And what that did was, when you would record a meeting, a seller would record a meeting with their customer, then conversation intelligence would analyze afterward and give sort of a recap that has, the main action items and a bulleted list of the highlights of the meeting. So it was my manager, whose name is Erga Herzog, and she was the one who, in the sales organization, really, built that relationship with the data scientists. And also, I work with a lot of other content designers too. So basically, I was lucky to come in about two years ago with this really strong base that was already very far along. Like, we had a good relationship with the data science team, and there was, there was already that conversation was starting. So what we're doing now is we're sort of trying to formalize that process, because sometimes it relies on the individual content designer or the individual data scientist to decide when we, start talking about a certain feature. And we'd rather have it, be more formalized into a process that, like, okay, at this point we start talking, and then at this point we start looking at sample outputs, and maybe we first, decide together, along with the PMs and the rest of the product squad and the leadership, of course, what we want out of this particular AI feature. So that's something that we're working on right now, which is really exciting.
That is exciting because this is also new, and at some point you have to and it must be I can only imagine the pace of work there. But so being far enough into it to kind of step back and go like, oh, hey, this is how sort of the routine way that we do, or not routine, but like the common way that we do things. Is that sort of, do you think that's common across the other flavors of Copilot, or like, because you mentioned you're talking to your peers as well as your immediate colleagues. Is there sort of patterns emerging around how those, like you just said, like when to start the conversation, when to formalize things, I guess.
I don't know of specific processes, but the way things at Microsoft often work is like, sometimes it bubbles up organically, and sometimes it comes from top down. So I think in the end, we will have a much more like unified process, but it's very scrappy right now. So it's it's hard to say exactly what the other teams are doing, but we do have a design system, and the content designers are also involved in the design system. And in a lot of ways, like we're sort of, bringing up those things that made, like, for instance, a pillar of responsible AI, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute, but one of them is transparency. So, like, we want the user to know what's going on. We want the user to know that AI is being used and like how it works. So our design system work often involves saying, like, we need to be able to have a tooltip, for instance, that can have a link to the documentation, because we want to use progressive disclosure and we don't want to put everything in the tooltip. We want to have this. And so it's like technical conversations like that, but they start from a responsible AI need, for instance, or a content need.
Yeah, that's that notion of well, this is a good time to pivot to talking about specifically about responsible AI, because I want to talk about the principles that underlie it, but it sounds like once you've got some guidance around responsible development in these things, that you have places for it in the design system. So that seems like a really good formalization of things. But let's back up a little bit, and if you can tell me, because you mentioned before that you're sort of an internal champion for responsible AI, and tell me about the principles, and then about your role as a champion for them.
So your listeners, I'm sure, are very smart and very, like, tuned in to what's going on with AI and content and all that. So I think we probably all, like, read a lot about what's going on, and think a lot about, hear these stories about, like, what can go wrong with AI. Like, AI these days can affect whether you get a job, whether you get a mortgage, whether you get a date, and even whether you go to jail. There was a story a couple years ago about a man who was wrongly arrested, and he spent a few days in jail before he was finally released. But he was wrongly matched by an image recognition software, and he happens to be Black, and image recognition is less accurate for Black people still. So there's things like that. AI, has a lot of potential to do good, but it also has a lot of potential for harm. And there's we hear about deep fakes, or voice cloning and all that kind of stuff. And so there's real value in thinking all along the way about how we can prevent that harm as much as we can, and make sure that we're building models that don't perpetuate, the kind of biases that we already have in society. So Microsoft, I'm lucky to, like, be part of an organization that it not only has already thought about, like, the principles of responsible AI, but is very open about sharing them. So I'll share the link to the Microsoft Responsible AI page. Has a lot of resources that anybody can use in their jobs, and there's 6 principles that have been identified as being the most important for keeping in mind. And I have them written down, so I'm going to read them. There's fairness. Yeah, I don't have a tattoo of it yet. Reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. So when we think about all those things together, and there's more involved definitions of each, and when we try to bring those into our daily practices, that's how we create the most responsible AI that we can. And so what I do is I'm sort of the voice that is, saying, like, hey, what about this edge case? Or what about that edge case? And I've gotten in the habit of trying to think of what those could be, and bringing those up when we can. And another thing that I do a lot is I go through a lot of output. before we release things, I'm reading a lot of, tags or generated emails or generated summaries or things like that. I'm reading a lot of output, and it's kind of like at some stage, I think that we'll be able to rely on AI checking itself and filtering itself, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we really still need people to go in and sample and really look at these things. So, and I just bring things up. And so there are other responsible AI champions on the team who have also a very formal process of when a feature is released, we have to go through a checklist and make sure that we've discussed and defended different things to make sure that they meet the criteria of responsible AI.
That's the way you just said that reminds me of accessibility. That I know that there's a checklist at the end, but I'm assuming it's not just a checklist at the end, that you're trying to bake it in at the beginning of the process as well. And I guess tell me, as a champion, is this mostly around your fellow content designers or with the data scientists you're working with, or how big is your championing soapbox, I guess?
My personal one is within the Copilot for Sales product squad. But we have official champions who are in, the entire business unit, and that are working on all different products, and they get to see, across what's going on with AI in the business unit. So it's definitely a position that's taken seriously within Microsoft. And it's good that you brought up accessibility, because it is similar in that we have to get used to thinking of it and get used to remembering it and get used to baking it in along the way.
Now I'm wondering, I don't think I've ever seen it, but I think I have it in my head of what that list of principles for accessibility looks like. It's probably very similar, actually. But so those you've probably internalized these principles at this point. But how do they manifest in the product? Like, for example, accountability. That was an interesting one. That's the sixth principle you mentioned. Is there a mechanism for accountability? If I'm just thinking of if you give if Copilot gave bad advice, is anybody accountable for that, or do you just, because of the nature of the tooling, do you just have to say look, we don't always get it 100% perfect? How does that? I guess, how do you balance the principles?
Well, we can't. I mean, we don't promise that Copilot will never mess up, honestly. And we have an AI disclaimer on our generated text, just like GPT does, by the way. Like, if you've seen ChatGPT, it has a disclaimer saying, just so you know, this ChatGPT might make something up. And so on our output, which in Copilot for Sales, it could be a summary of an email, or it could be a sales email that is generated by Copilot, or a recap of a sales meeting. So on all of those, we have the disclaimer, which is that, Copilot is just a helper, and you still need to check and make sure that it's really, the information that you want to be sending to your customers or to your boss. We also have feedback, like thumbs up, thumbs down, and send us feedback, which we read and which we act on. And as far as accountability, our main premise there, along with transparency, is that we want our users to be empowered with as much information as possible. So we have a team in my business unit that's called the Human AI Interaction Team, and it's led by a researcher named Jennifer Wong, and there's a bunch of researchers there, and they are in my organization, they're the ones who are very focused on transparency and accountability. And when I joined the team, I was like very pleasantly surprised to see that we were telling the user exactly when we were using the AI, exactly how it works, and what they can and can't expect from it. So one of my first projects in Copilot for Sales was to write a pretty detailed set of questions and answers, like what is this? When do I use it? How does it work? When can I what can I expect from it? All that sort of stuff. So I think that is like empowering users to be like savvy consumers of AI, I think is very important.
Yeah, no, the way you just said that, you're reminding me of a couple things that have come up in other conversations. Like Nazir Bina and many others have made the point that like these GPTs are like interns. They're they're really smart and clever and can figure stuff out, but they're not as experienced as you. And that's sort of like, I'm assuming that's part of that disclaimer is like, hey, look, you're still the salesperson here, and it's up to you to take this information and tailor it to your professional style and things like that. What was the other thing I was just thinking of? It'll come back. But that's really that point of like sort of empowering the users, because I guess this is all so new. I guess, do you feel like that's the other thing that's come up that I was just thinking of, is that to this point, before the arrival of GPTs, you could pretty much count on computers to always do the same thing. They were pretty reliable computing machines. And now the very nature of transformers and GPTs is that they're predictive models, and they're not always based in fact. I guess, is that part of there must be different levels of championing, I'm guessing, because there's both in any one product, making sure that people understand what's going on at the time. But is there do you feel like an obligation as a champion to inform people like, hey, this is a different kind of computing we're working with now, and you need to develop things differently? Or
That's an interesting question. I think that there is definitely a place for that. It's hard though, because you want to balance the user being in their flow and getting their work done, with empowering them with this knowledge. Like when someone is just wants to write an email and get it over with, they want to make sure it's correct, obviously, especially if they're sending it to a customer, which is the case for our users. But they also just want to get the email done. So like one of the things we think about a lot is what's the balance between education and keeping people in their flow. And that I mentioned earlier, we use progressive disclosure a lot for that. So we may have like a line of text in the UI, some microcopy that says like, use Copilot to craft your emails faster, or use Copilot to get a detailed recap of this sales conversation. And then, the next level of disclosure is a tooltip with more information. And then it may have a link inside to the documentation, which will give you like really a detailed description. So what I found is that people who are using Copilot for work are interested in how it works. And it's good to have that explanation there for them when they're ready for it. We just have to make it accessible, but not interrupting their flow of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just said it's like the whole point is to get stuff done. So and that notion of both progressive disclosure and just sort of not being an intrusive force in their life, that's an interesting balance, and I think it's good. But it also reminds me, like, that's sort of like, there's this notion that has, I think, a fairly specific meaning in like the machine learning world of the human in the loop, like in reinforcement learning with human feedback and other kinds of human stuff. And you've mentioned also that like one of the primary things that drives the need for responsible AI is like people, biases and assumptions and sometimes not good motives. Can you talk a little bit about like just that notion of, is that something you think about, like that notion of the human in the loop, and how does that manifest in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So uh, we definitely use human in the loop for some of our features because, as I said, like these are people who are using AI for work. The stakes are really high, and we need to be able to give people a way to correct if the AI is wrong or, fine tune things. So we definitely use the principles of human in the loop for the users. Like I'll give an example. We have a project that I worked on was a sort of enriched summary of a seller's email, where we also pull in information from their CRM. So like Salesforce or Dynamics 365, which is where they keep all their customer information, and they don't normally like have automatic access to it when they're in email. But it was helpful. We found in research that it was helpful for people to have like a summary that was like rich and had pulled things from both. And so, but we had to be able to let the user choose a different opportunity, let's say, from the CRM, in case the one that we were proposing is not right. So in that case, the user is in the loop of creating the summary. And in other cases, we have, for instance, if the user is generating an email, they always have the option to edit it in Outlook before they send it. They always have the option to start over or, change it. So there's that. As far as human in the loop in the overall like product development, that's also something that we think about. As I said earlier, I go through a lot of output, and like sometimes it can feel like a lot of like grunt work at the time, because the data science team will say, here's, 50 emails that we generated because we're, testing variants of the prompt. And so what I've been doing, and which I really also warmly suggest to anyone who's involved in AI features, is to roll up your sleeves and to sit down and like spend an afternoon just reading through them, because you can, in the best case, you say, okay, we can, tweak the prompt and make an even better output. But other times you'll catch things. And so that's definitely like that's how we do human in the loop in like the product development process. But as for like, you were also talking about bad actors and thinking about like what kind of things can go wrong with our AI. So this is something that I think is really, really important for people who are designing AI products, is to get in the habit of thinking of these edge cases. Like, okay, I'm a well-behaved content designer. I don't want to do something bad with this product. But if I were a troll, what would I do? And how would I try to break it? And how could I cause harm to someone? Or how could I use this, product in a way that is not what Microsoft wants them to use the product for? So it's something that didn't come naturally to me, but basically I started by reading as much as I could about things that went wrong with AI. And that sort of gave me like the basis for like, okay, this is how people have misused AI in the past, or this is how the model went wrong. And then you just decide to do it. So like, just like, when you need to write something, you sit down and you decide, and then you start brainstorming and it comes. So for instance, like, if you are, well, I'll give you an example. Like, so I work on Copilot for sales. And at the beginning, when I was saying, okay, people are at work, like, are they really going to behave that badly? Are they really going to, try to misuse this? But then I did a little more research, and I found out that so people who are doing like call center sales often experience a lot of abuse from their customers. Like it's terrible. They call these people, and the people are rude or they're abusive, and and I was thinking, well, we're telling sellers that they need to record all our phone calls and then read the transcripts later or read the recap. We don't want them to read this, like abusive tirade that someone has said to them. So that's just one example of how a person can misuse it. Another example that I came across was I was interested in Midjourney and DALL-E and all of the image generation tools. And this was, I guess, about a year ago now. So I was using Midjourney to just, generate some images. Like my kids were home and we were playing around with it and stuff. And the interesting thing about Midjourney is you can, like, I'm sure by now lots of people who are listening have used it. But for anybody who hasn't, you are in a chat room, and not only can you see the prompt that you have asked for Midjourney, but you can also see what other people have asked for and the images that are being generated. And so that was how I came across an image of a man who was sitting and typing on a computer in front of a pyramid. It was like a drawing, and he was supposed to look like an ancient Jewish person. And so I wanted to see what the prompt was, and it was an ancient Israelite sitting typing in front of a computer in front of the pyramid, something innocuous. It caught my eye because I'm Jewish, and I thought about how does this make me feel? Maybe it's fine, but maybe whatever, it's nothing. But because I had started in this habit of okay, let's think about how this could go wrong. So I figured if there are people who are asking for innocuous pictures of Jewish people, then maybe there are people who are asking for anti-Semitic depictions of Jewish people. And you can do a search in Midjourney, which I did, and I very quickly found terrible things. So all of that is to say, once you get in the habit of looking for what could go wrong, it gets easier, and you start to say, oh, I can see this and I can see that. So nothing like that, thankfully, happens in Copilot. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that in my work life. But we do have to sort of decide, we have to decide, okay, someone's going to is going to type an inappropriate prompt for their email or something that we think is inappropriate. And we have to decide, what is the experience going to be? Are we going, and in the end, what happens is we show them an error message. And it says this prompt may be inappropriate or something like that. Because first of all, we can't be 100% sure that what they've typed is really inappropriate. We do err on the side of caution. And there's actually a bunch of fail safes that scam stuff like that. But this way, if the person has, typed something, that's we don't want the Microsoft name on, then we know that we're not going to have a part, and Copilot's not going to have a part in generating that inappropriate email.
Yeah, I love the way you articulated your role earlier as the well-behaved content designer versus the trolls. And thanks for all your help on that, because those examples you gave too are that's just typical human stuff. And but hey, Leah, I can't believe it. We're coming up close to time. But before we wrap up, is there anything you want to revisit from the conversation, or just want to make sure you share before we wrap up?
I would just encourage everybody who's working on AI stuff to get really curious and ask a lot of questions, and never be afraid to ask questions of your team members and data science and all of your colleagues, because as we know from working with, in our history of content design, we've sometimes been told that like it's too technical or it's not ready for content to be involved yet. And we know that we can handle the technical stuff and we can handle it and we can ask the questions. And so just do those things that we've been doing this whole time and that tool that we have in our toolbox. Because, the thing about AI that's so exciting is that so much of the input is words and so much of the output is words. And that's like that's our thing. So we really have the chance to make a big impact here.
Nice. I love that, reinforcing that point that this is a lot of people are worried right now, but reinforcing the point like, no, lots of opportunities for words people here. So thanks. Oh, and Leah, one very last thing. If folks want to connect with you online or follow you, what's the best way to find you online?
I think LinkedIn is best. I'm happy to meet people and talk to people there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation, Leah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I did too.
For show notes and to sign up for our newsletter, visit our website at contentandai.com. And please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening.